The instant Dr. Ethan Reeves grasped the grim reality that he was destined to perish in solitude on an unexplored moon, his initial thought was surprisingly trivial. It confirmed his ex-girlfriend Sarah's judgment regarding his life choices. His second reflection, as the failing life support of his escape pod gasped like a faulty concertina, was a sharp regret for not focusing more during the emergency landing drills, instead of internally planning his grocery run. The collision itself was spectacular, the kind of impressive destruction that would earn cheers in a disaster holovideo, complete with brilliant sparks, chaotic rotation, and a sound he was convinced was his own high-pitched shriek, forming an accidental duet with the pod's proximity alarms. Now, the vessel lay crushed against a cluster of crystalline trees that fractured the remote gas giant's glow into a kaleidoscope of purple and amber. It was truly beautiful. Ethan had always appreciated a good twist of fate, and meeting his end surrounded by such splendor while smelling of recycled perspiration and scorched circuits felt appropriately ironic for a xenobiologist whose career largely revolved around studying plankton specimens. 3 days. That was the length of his stay here, carefully rationing his oxygen supply and attempting to revive the communications array using a mixture of genuine technical expertise and an escalating vocabulary of creative vulgarities. The moon itself was a landscape of stark contrasts. A never-ending twilight that refused to fully settle into darkness, an atmosphere almost but not quite suitable for breathing, and a silence so profound it compelled Ethan to speak out loud just to confirm his own existence. "All right, panel C7," he mumbled, his fingers numb from the chill penetrating his damaged pressure suit. "We both know you're not genuinely broken. You're just being difficult because I forgot to execute the level 3 diagnostics before we departed the Meridian Dawn. My apologies. Can we move past this?" Unsurprisingly, the panel offered no reply. Ethan sighed and retrieved his plasma torch, peering at the melted circuitry. Behind him, the stretch of dark volcanic plain extended towards a structure he had observed on his second day. Something angular and ancient, jutting out from the terrain like a shattered molar. He had avoided exploring it, partly because his suit's power cell was nearly drained, partly because every existing survival guide unequivocally warned, "Never investigate strange extraterrestrial ruins alone." But mostly he feared what he might encounter or worse what might find him. A noise pierced the deep stillness. Gentle, deliberate, like steps on fragile glass. Ethan froze, the plasma torch still raised, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs, desperate for escape. He turned slowly, in the manner of characters in a horror film just moments before their demise, mentally reviewing everything he knew about hostile alien life forms. The inventory was disappointingly brief and useless. The figure stood near the edge of the crystal forest, partly obscured by the dispersed, prismatic light. Humanoid. That was his first clear thought. His second was the intense, focused gaze with which she was observing him, a scrutiny that caused his skin to tingle. His third was the absolute certainty that he was entirely unprepared for a first-contact scenario, especially while looking as though he had been steeped in his own anxiety-induced sweat for 72 hours. "Right," he announced aloud, because apparently, his mouth had decided to act independently of his rational mind. "So hello. I come in peace. Obviously. I mean, technically, given the crash, I arrived in pieces, but the intention remains." The figure did not stir. Ethan's grip tightened on the plasma torch, though he had no clue what he intended to do with a tool designed for fusing delicate electronic components against a potential threat. Most likely he'd just ignite himself. That would be entirely consistent with his current luck. "I am human," he continued, echoing every lecture on first contact protocol he had ever dozed through. "From Earth, the third planet in the Sol system. We are mostly benign, although historically that's debatable. I'm a scientist, a xenobiologist, in fact, which is wonderfully ironic right now because I'm supposed to be studying alien life, not scaring it with my mere presence." He paused. "You're not scared, are you? You seem remarkably calm. That's either very good or very bad news for me." The figure moved then, stepping forward with a fluid grace that seemed to disregard the moon's reduced gravity. As she emerged from the shimmering shadows, Ethan's breath hitched. She was humanoid, yes, but the specific characteristics struck him with the power of a revelation. Her ears swept up and back into elegant points, reminiscent of ancient Earth myths, delicate and somehow noble despite her well-worn garments. Her skin possessed a subtle sheen, barely noticeable in the twilight. And her eyes, those eyes captured the ambient light and held it, reflecting it back with an inner luminescence that was equally stunning and profoundly unnerving. She was also wearing a ceremonial mask, intricately designed, covering the lower half of her face with detailed metalwork that appeared to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Okay," Ethan said, forcing his voice to remain level. "A mask? That's fine. Very mysterious. I respect that. Some cultures maintain strong traditions regarding facial covering. I'm certainly not here to judge. I'm barely here at all, technically speaking." She tilted her head, and Ethan had the distinct impression she was observing him with the same intense curiosity he might reserve for a particularly baffling microorganism. It was an uncomfortable sensation. "Do you comprehend me?" He attempted, knowing his translator implant was useless without the main computer of his suit to boost its range. "I'm not sure if you speak standard or any human language, or if you even communicate verbally. Perhaps you are telepathic. Are you telepathic? Please don't be reading my mind right now, as it's primarily composed of pure panic and inappropriate jokes." The woman advanced another step. Ethan's scientific discipline wrestled with his instinct for self-preservation. The scientist within him took note of the biomechanics of her movement, the cautiousness of her approach, the evident intellect in her stance. The terrified, primal part of his brain screamed about predator-prey dynamics and how he was, beyond any doubt, the prey in this scenario. "Look," he said, placing the plasma torch down in what he hoped was a universally recognized gesture of non-aggression. "I'm stranded. My ship, well, my escape pod, is damaged. I've been attempting to repair the communications array, but I'm running dangerously low on oxygen, power, and frankly, my own competency. If you are benevolent, I could genuinely use some assistance. If you are not benevolent, could you at least make it swift? I would prefer not to face a protracted death while engaging in awkward small talk." The woman stopped approximately 3 meters away. Close enough for Ethan to distinguish the subtle patterns woven into her attire, geometric designs that seemed to faintly shimmer with their own energy. Close enough to observe that her hands, clasped in front of her, were trembling slightly. She was afraid. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. This woman, this being who possessed every possible advantage in the current circumstances, who likely knew this moon intimately while he floundered in confusion, she was terrified of him. "Hey," Ethan said softly, genuinely surprised, consciously softening his tone. "It's okay. I'm not going to cause you any harm. I couldn't hurt you even if I wanted to. I'm a xenobiologist who specialized in extremophile algae. My most dangerous talent is tediously boring people at social gatherings with overly detailed explanations of photosynthetic processes." Ethan awoke to the aroma of food being prepared, an occurrence that seemed utterly impossible for about 17 distinct reasons. Firstly, his emergency provisions consisted solely of bland nutrient paste. Secondly, he was almost certain he had dozed off completely alone inside the pod. He opened his eyes and found himself gazing at a ceiling that was definitively not stamped aluminum alloy. This ceiling was fashioned from dark, polished stone, interlaced with subtle, glowing veins that traced patterns, perhaps decorative, perhaps functional, or potentially both. "Oh, wonderful," he commented to the ceiling. "I've been abducted. That's a new development." He slowly sat up, performing a self-assessment. He was still wearing his damaged pressure suit minus the helmet and was still alive, which was a pleasant surprise. He was situated in what looked like a small cavern, carved from the same dark material as the ceiling, with walls that curved naturally instead of meeting at sharp angles. He was definitely inside the ancient structure he had observed from his crash site. And there, near what could generously be described as an entrance, sat the masked woman, tending to something that hissed over a heat source which produced no visible flame. "So," Ethan ventured, "I'm gathering you don't speak standard, or you would have mentioned that moving an unconscious stranger is usually explained beforehand." He paused. "Did I lose consciousness? I feel like I blacked out. Low oxygen tends to do that. Quite mortifying. Not my proudest moment as a representative of the human race." The woman glanced at him, her luminous eyes impossible to decipher, before returning her attention to her cooking. The scent was actually quite appealing, suggesting either that the food was genuinely edible or that his oxygen-starved brain was making dangerously poor judgments about cuisine. Given his recent history, both possibilities seemed equally likely. Ethan searched for his helmet and located it near his feet, along with his emergency pack and, bewilderingly, his partially dismantled communications array. Someone had been highly industrious while he was incapacitated. Furthermore, someone had apparently hauled his entire survival gear into these ruins, implying either phenomenal physical power or the use of unnoticed anti-gravity technology. "Right then, well, thank you," he said, indicating the room generally, "for not allowing me to suffocate. That was thoughtful. I feel we're off to a respectable start for interspecies relations, assuming you don't intend to consume me later." You aren't planning to eat me, are you? He observed her carefully. Your demeanor, honestly, suggests nervous recluse more than calculated predator. So, I will proceed with the assumption that I am a guest rather than dinner. The woman reached for something nearby and extended it towards him. A bowl, carved from the same dark stone, containing a thick, gently steaming stew. Ethan's stomach, which had been subsisting on nutrient paste and sheer willpower, instantly staged a revolt against his brain's rational skepticism. Is that food? He asked, immediately feeling foolish. Obviously it's food. You're offering me sustenance. That is incredibly kind, and also slightly alarming because I have no idea what it is or if my digestive system can handle it. He accepted the bowl regardless, as his instinct for survival had clearly capitulated to his intense hunger. If this ends up killing me, please understand it's not entirely your fault. Well, it is partly your fault, but I am choosing to ingest mysterious alien stew, so we truly share the responsibility. He cautiously inhaled the scent. Definitely something vegetable. Something else that might be protein. Nothing that smelled immediately toxic, though he admitted his Earth-based olfactory system was hardly a trustworthy guide to xenobiological edibility. The woman watched him with what might have been eagerness, or perhaps the extraterrestrial equivalent of observing a lab experiment unfold. Ethan took a small spoonful. A burst of flavor erupted on his tongue, earthy, faintly sweet, with a distinct undertone that brought mushrooms to mind but wasn't quite right. His taste buds celebrated. His stomach offered a prayer of thanks. His brain muttered something about adhering to proper xenobiological protocols and was promptly ignored. This is phenomenal, he managed around another mouthful. I mean, it could be slowly poisoning me, but if death tastes this good, I'm accepting my fate. He looked at her sincerely. Seriously, thank you. I can't recall the last time I had actual food. The Meridian Dawn synthesizers were malfunctioning for 3 months before the accident. Everything tasted like distilled misery. The woman's shoulders relaxed fractionally, a subtle change that Ethan noticed only because he had spent years observing micro-expressions in research subjects. She was pleased, perhaps even proud. He had successfully conveyed something positive across the immense chasm of language and culture, which felt like a small miracle. I'm Ethan, he said, pointing to himself. Ethan Reeves, human. Generally inept at survival, but surprisingly competent at consuming soup. He then pointed to her, questioning. And you are? She stared at him for a lengthy moment, then raised one elegant hand and touched her mask. The gesture appeared defensive, protective. When she spoke, her voice was so soft he almost missed it, filtered through the mask into something that might have been words in a language his translator couldn't process, or possibly something else entirely. I'll call that progress, Ethan decided. You spoke. That's good. That confirms vocal communication is an option. He finished the stew, relishing every spoonful, then carefully set the bowl down. Look, I know this is strange. I crash land on your moon. You're now dealing with an unexpected alien who won't stop talking, probably disrupting whatever solitary life you've cultivated here. But I urgently need to fix my communications array and signal my ship, assuming they're still looking for me. I promise that once I'm rescued I will leave, and you can return to your quiet existence. He paused. Unless you don't want to be alone. I'm not making assumptions, but you did save my life and feed me, which suggests either profound kindness or a very complicated long-term plan that I haven't grasped yet. The woman rose in a single, flowing movement and crossed to where his communications array lay scattered. She knelt beside it, her fingers hovering above the components without actually making contact, as if she could perceive their function through mere proximity. Then she did something that left Ethan speechless. She reached for a small device on her belt, no larger than his thumb, and activated it with a precise gesture. The device projected a holographic schematic that matched the design of his communications array almost flawlessly, except this version included technical alterations he had never encountered. Integration points for technology that was definitely non-human. Power routing solutions that bypassed the standard limitations of his equipment. You understand how this operates, Ethan whispered, moving closer despite himself. You comprehend the technology, yet this moon isn't on any star charts. There is no recorded contact with any species in this sector. He looked at her with fresh eyes, his mind rapidly sifting through the possibilities. Who are you? What are you doing here by yourself? The woman's hand went to her mask again, the familiar protective movement, but this time she seemed to be grappling with an internal struggle. Slowly, with apparent reluctance, she reached up and lightly touched a point near her ear. The mask hissed quietly and released its hold, though she did not fully remove it. Instead, she spoke again, and this time his translator captured fragments. Not a complete translation, but sufficient for his neural implant to begin constructing a linguistic database. Exile. The word came through clearly, weighted with significant meaning. Monster, dangerous, hide. Wait, Ethan said, his scientific curiosity momentarily yielding to his compassion. You're exiled? Someone intentionally left you here alone? The implications horrified him. How long have you been on this moon? She held up fingers. Too many fingers. Ethan's translator struggled with the numerical system, but eventually provided an estimate that caused his chest to tighten painfully. Decades. She had been isolated for decades. That is not merely exile, he said quietly. That is outright cruelty. He looked at her, truly seeing her, looking past the luminous eyes and the elegant ears to the profound loneliness that seemed to emanate from her like warmth from a cooling star. You are not a monster. I don't know what your people believed you did, but I have personally met monsters. I have studied organisms that dissolve their prey from the inside out while deliberately sustaining their life for days. I have documented parasites that fundamentally rewrite their host's brain chemistry, causing them to welcome their own consumption. You prepared a soup for me. You mended my oxygen delivery system while I was unconscious. You are quite literally the least monstrous entity I've encountered in 3 years of deep space exploration. Calira had revealed her name on the 4th day, shortly after Ethan had accidentally electrocuted himself while attempting to fuse her technology with his communication array, which led to 20 minutes of him cursing in 3 different Earth languages. She had actually chuckled, a sound muffled by her mask, yet unmistakable in its genuine amusement, and then carefully relieved him of the tools before he could inflict further damage on himself or the gear. Now, almost 2 weeks into his unexpected stay, Ethan had established what he generously referred to as a daily routine. Mornings were devoted to working on the array while Calira supervised with what he had learned to recognize as thinly veiled horror at his technical ineptitude. In the afternoons, she would vanish into the deeper sections of the ruins, returning with various items. Power cells that should have ceased functioning millennia ago, crystalline data storage units that made his scanner practically sing with delight, and once, an entire control panel that she carried as easily as he might lift a book. I'm beginning to suspect you're significantly stronger than you appear, Ethan remarked as she placed down what looked like a generator core, easily weighing 80 kilograms. Either that, or this moon's gravitational pull is even lighter than my scanner suggests, and I've been dramatically overexerting myself purely for comedic effect. Calira's eyes crinkled in the way he understood to be her equivalent of a smile. Her translation implant had been actively learning standard from his constant stream of conversation, and she could now comprehend most of what he said, though she rarely replied with more than a few words. She gestured toward him, then exaggeratedly flexed her arm. Are you accusing me of being weak? Ethan asked with mock indignation. I'll have you know, I once transported 17 crates of algae samples up 4 flights of stairs because the lift was broken. Admittedly, I paused to weep twice, but I completed the task. She made a noise that sounded like soft laughter and held up her little finger. Rude, Ethan declared, grinning despite himself. Accurate but rude. He turned back to the communications array, which now resembled a piece of equipment designed by a joint committee of humans and whatever species had constructed this place. Okay, so if I reroute the power through your crystalline matrix instead of the standard capacitors, I should manage to boost the signal enough to reach the Meridian Dawn search grid. Assuming they are still actively searching, assuming they didn't classify me as lost and return home, and assuming my captain hasn't immediately leased my quarters to someone less prone to catastrophic mishap. Calira moved closer, pointing to a connection he had made between 2 components. She shook her head definitively. No. But the power flow should. He stopped as she swiftly disconnected his work and rewired it differently, her fingers moving with expert precision. Oh, that's vastly superior. That's genuinely brilliant. He watched her work, captivated. Where did you acquire this knowledge? These ruins, are they your people's? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her hand instinctively went to her mask again, the familiar gesture he had observed dozens of times. When she spoke, her words emerged haltingly through the translator, which was still adapting to standard syntax. Old place. Before fear. Before, she struggled for the correct word. Separation. Your people built this as what? An outpost? A research station? Ethan's scientific curiosity flared brightly. These ruins must be thousands of years old. The sheer architectural style alone suggests a civilization that understood energy manipulation on a scale humans are still only hypothesizing about. The crystalline technology. The organic integration of structure and function. Calira, your people were incredible. She flinched at the word, a reaction so subtle Ethan barely registered it. Past tense. As if that magnificent civilization had somehow devolved into something else, something that abandoned its own kind on desolate moons. What occurred? He asked gently. Why are you here alone? Calira's hands stilled on the equipment. For a long moment Ethan feared she wouldn't answer, that he had pressed too far, too quickly. Then she stood and walked to the entrance of the chamber, gazing out at the perpetual twilight landscape. When she spoke, her voice was low enough that his translator nearly missed it. I take energy. Life. She turned to face him, and even with the mask, the profound sense of shame in her posture was palpable. She gestured weakly, searching for words, empty. Die of too much. Ethan carefully processed the information. Some form of energy absorption ability. Vampiric in a way, though the underlying mechanism was likely far more sophisticated than Earth mythology suggested. You drain bioenergy from living organisms through physical contact? She nodded, her entire body rigid, as if bracing for him to recoil, to flee, to confirm every terrible thing she had been told about herself. That is truly fascinating, Ethan said instead, his scientist's mind immediately racing through questions. The biological mechanism alone must be extraordinarily complex. How exactly do you regulate the rate of transfer? Is it purely voluntary or is it autonomic? What type of energy specifically? Cellular electrical potential? Chemical bonds? Is it something operating at the quantum level? He stood up, moving toward her with the enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered the perfect new research subject. Have you ever studied the process yourself? Do you understand the mechanics? Calira stared at him as if he had suddenly begun speaking in unknown tongues. You're not afraid. Afraid? Calira? You're a walking violation of thermodynamics. You are potentially the single most interesting xenobiological specimen I have ever encountered. And I once spent 3 months studying a microorganism that could survive inside a star. He caught himself. Apologies, specimen is a horrible word. You are a person, not a research subject. But you are also absolutely breathtaking from a purely scientific viewpoint. Monster, she repeated, the word heavy with ancient pain. They say monster. Dangerous. Wrong. They were idiots, Ethan stated flatly. Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand the cultural context that led to your exile. Perhaps there were accidents. Maybe people got hurt before you learned to master your abilities. But labeling you a monster simply for having a biological capability you were born with? That's like calling a shark a monster for possessing teeth. It's what you are. It is not inherently evil. It is not wrong. It is simply evolution performing its bizarrely creative work. I killed, Calira said, her voice cracking. Yeah. Before control. I killed. The confession hung heavily in the confined space. Ethan absorbed it, comprehension dawning. A child with lethal powers she didn't grasp, couldn't manage. The palpable fear that must have surrounded her. The isolation stemming not from her choice, but from the terror of everyone else. How old were you? He asked gently. She held up fingers. His translator suggested the equivalent of 7 or 8 human years. You were a child, Ethan affirmed. Children do not possess control over their abilities, whatever those abilities may be. Human children constantly break things. We just usually can't break things as dramatically as you could. He moved closer, stopping just outside what he estimated was her physical comfort zone. You are not a monster. You are someone who was dealt an incredibly difficult hand and then blamed for not knowing how to play it flawlessly from birth. That is not justice. That is simply cruelty disguised as safety. Calira's hands were trembling. Slowly, for the first time since he had met her, she reached up and touched the release mechanism on her mask. It disengaged with a soft click and she lowered it, revealing the face she had concealed for decades. Ethan looked at her, truly looked, and felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, not in spite of her luminous eyes and delicate pointed ears, but because of them, because of the elegant structure of her face, the soft vulnerability in her expression, and the way she stood there, equally terrified and brave, waiting for his final judgment. The most beautiful being in the galaxy, Ethan said quietly, meaning every single word. Definitely not terrifying. Perhaps a little daunting because you are roughly 4 times more intelligent than I am, but that's really more of a deficiency on my part. A single tear traced a path down Calira's cheek, catching the ambient light. She produced a soft sound that could have been either a laugh or a choked sob. Ethan, carefully, deliberately signaling his intention, moved to offer his hand in comfort, then recalled her inherent ability and stopped himself. Can you control it now? He asked. The energy transfer? She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then the choice is entirely yours, he said simply. I place my trust in you. The rescue vessel arrived on the 23rd day. Its distinct ion trail carved a line across the rings of the gas giant, like a blade slicing through silk. Ethan watched the approach from the highest observation point of the ruins, with Calira standing beside him, her mask back in position. She had worn it constantly since the ship's appearance on their improvised sensors, retreating into familiar protective habits like armor against anticipated judgment. "They have located you," she stated quietly. Ethan could not discern whether her voice conveyed relief or sorrow. "They have located us," he corrected her. "Calira, you don't need to hide. Not anymore." She turned those luminous eyes toward him, visible above the mask's edge. "You do not understand my people. You do not know what they think of me." "Then they are about to receive an education," Ethan said with far more conviction than he actually felt. His hand instinctively touched the data pad where he had spent the last week meticulously documenting everything: Calira's abilities, the ruins' technology, and the historical archives they had uncovered, which suggested her gifts were not deviations, but ancient, respected capabilities that a fearful modern society had deliberately forgotten. He had constructed his argument as he would any scientific case, with irrefutable evidence, logical reasoning, and sufficient xenobiological theory to subdue most individuals into agreement. The ship settled onto the dark, volcanic plain with professional exactitude. Ethan's heart sank when he recognized its configuration. It was not merely a rescue vessel, but a diplomatic transport, which meant the Meridian Dawn had reported his escape pod's trajectory through Vassar territory, and someone had decided this incident required official intervention. "Of course it's complicated," he muttered. "Why would my rescue ever be straightforward?" The boarding ramp extended, and 3 figures emerged: 2 humans in standard expedition fatigues, and 1 Vassar entity in formal diplomatic robes, designed to convey maximum authority with minimal warmth. Ethan felt Calira stiffen beside him. "That is Ambassador Thaloras," she whispered. "He was present when they sent me away." "Perfect," Ethan replied. "I've always wanted to deal with a heated diplomatic incident before breakfast." He briefly squeezed her hand, mindful of her ability, grateful she had taught herself such precise control. "Stay behind me. Let me handle the discussion. I'm very effective at talking. It is potentially my sole useful skill." They descended from the ruins to meet the rescue party. The 2 humans, Lieutenant Park and Dr. Vasquez, looked genuinely relieved to see him alive. Ambassador Thaloras, however, regarded Calira with the expression of someone viewing a hazardous chemical spill, professional detachment overlaying deep discomfort. He shared Calira's elegant ear structure and luminous eyes, though his held none of her warmth. "Dr. Reeves," Lieutenant Park said, "we are extremely pleased to find you alive. When your pod went dark, we feared the worst." "I had exceptional assistance," Ethan stated pointedly, gesturing to Calira. "Calira saved my life, provided shelter, and has been instrumental in repairing my equipment. Without her, you would be recovering a corpse." Ambassador Thaloras spoke then, his standard flawless but icy. "This individual must not be here. These ruins are interdicted. The exile is absolute." "Funny thing about exile," Ethan responded, his voice pleasant but his eyes unwavering. "It's usually reserved for criminals." What precisely was Calira's crime? Being born with capabilities your people failed to comprehend? Having an accident as a child before she learned control? "You fundamentally misunderstand our customs," the ambassador said stiffly. "The risk she presents." "I understand that she has maintained perfect control for decades," Ethan interjected. "I understand that these ruins contain historical records demonstrating that her abilities were not always feared. They were once celebrated. I understand that your civilization constructed this facility as a sanctuary for individuals with her gifts, to teach them, to honor them. What became of that culture, Ambassador? When did the Vassar Dominion trade wisdom for fear?" Thaloras' expression remained neutral, but something flickered momentarily in his eyes. "You accessed the archives." Calira accessed the archives, Ethan corrected him. "Because apparently Exile doesn't include a user manual, and she has been attempting to understand her own existence for 30 years. The archives recognized her biosignature, activating entire systems that have been dormant for centuries. She didn't merely survive here, Ambassador, she reawakened something your people forgot ever existed." As if responding to his statement, the ruins behind them began to glow. Faintly at first, then intensifying to a radiance that bathed the twilight in shades of gold and silver. The ancient crystalline technology that Calira had been painstakingly reactivating over weeks of careful effort was reaching its critical peak, and Ethan had timed his speech perfectly to align with the phenomenon they had uncovered 3 days prior. "What is this?" Dolores demanded, alarm finally fracturing his diplomatic composure. The Lumi network, Ethan announced, unable to completely suppress the satisfaction in his voice. Your people constructed it millennia ago as a communication and energy-sharing system among allied species. It linked dozens of civilizations in peaceful cooperation. Calira's abilities aren't a genetic flaw, Ambassador. They are the essential biological interface that makes the entire system function. The light from the ruins coalesced into brilliant beams that shot upward, penetrating the atmosphere towards space. Dr. Vasquez's scanner began beeping frantically, and Lieutenant Park was already reporting the situation to the Meridian Dawn. The signals would propagate across the sector, touching old relay stations, awakening ancient technologies on a dozen different worlds. You cannot carry out this action, Dolores said, but his voice lacked its previous certainty. The Dominion will not permit it. The Dominion will be forced to adapt, Ethan stated firmly. Because other species are going to respond to these signals, and when they arrive asking about the Lumi network, you will require someone who understands it, someone who can interface with it. He looked at Calira, who had removed her mask and was watching the dazzling display with unbridled wonder on her face. Someone like Calira whom you attempted to bury and forget. Dolores stared at the phenomenon, then at Calira, and for the first time Ethan perceived something other than cold diplomatic calculation in his expression, perhaps uncertainty or the first stirrings of genuine shame. I remember you, the ambassador said quietly to Calira. You were a child. The council feared what you might become. I became exactly what you feared, Calira responded, her voice steady and resonant. Powerful. Different. But also kind, educated, and in control. All things I achieved alone because you left me no other choice. The other species, Dr. Vasquez exclaimed, reviewing her scanner readouts with the kind of scientific excitement Ethan recognized from his own research fugues. They are already responding. We are detecting acknowledgement signals from at least 6 distinct systems. Dr. Reeves, if this network is what you claim, this is the most significant archaeological discovery in human history. It is more than merely archaeological, Ethan countered. It is fully functional, and it requires Calira to operate it, not as a captive or an exile, but as what she was always meant to be, an ambassador, a vital bridge between species. Lieutenant Park cleared his throat. Sir, the Meridian Dawn is requesting immediate instructions. Several unidentified vessels are entering the sector, converging on our location. Instruct them to stand down and extend diplomatic greetings, Ethan ordered, then glanced at Dolores. Unless the Dominion wishes to explain to half the sector why they've been hoarding ancient peacekeeping technology and banishing the only person capable of operating it. The ambassador's expression indicated he was processing the political fallout at light speed. Finally, he turned to Calira and performed an act Ethan hadn't anticipated. He executed a deep, formal bow, a gesture of respect from a superior to an honored equal. I cannot erase 30 years of injustice, Dolores said. But perhaps we can construct something better starting from this moment if you are amenable. Calira looked at Ethan, and he saw the question in her luminous eyes. He nodded, smiling. She had rightfully earned this choice, this moment, this future. I am amenable, she confirmed. But I work with a partner. Ethan comes with me. I do, Ethan quickly interjected. Of course I do. Someone needs to document this entire process properly. Also, I've become accustomed to your cooking, and returning to nutrient paste would be genuinely tragic. Calira's laugh rang out across the plain, clear, joyous, and unrestrained. Ethan grinned at her, at the woman who had believed herself a monster and had discovered she held the key to connecting galaxies. The rescue ship's sensors were going berserk. The ancient network was singing across the void, and somewhere, his captain was likely enduring a stress-induced migraine over the mountain of resultant paperwork. But standing there in the twilight, with Calira beside him and stars beginning to answer ancient calls, Ethan realized that perhaps, occasionally, the universe did possess a sense of humor. After all, he had crash-landed searching for anomalous energy readings and ended up discovering the most significant signal in recorded history. And quite possibly, a girlfriend, although he would likely need to file some extremely unconventional first contact forms regarding that.